So you should get a little thing that says, so we're recording. So welcome to our very first town hall. We're going to be doing a whole bunch of guest artists throughout this semester, and our first one is with John Tovar. So today we're going to be talking about the Society of American Fight Directors, how to get started in stage combat, all that jazz. So John, you can go ahead and take it away. You want to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm John Tovar. I am legally blind. No, I'm kidding. I started off in stage combat when I was in high school. We did a production of West Side Story, but the director really didn't know or care about stage combat. So he just asked us to create a fight, big brawl. And my fight partner and I created some really, really fun stuff. Uh, Thankfully, we didn't get hurt. And so it kind of started from there. As the further I got into my career, I was in the more professional shows that I worked in, the less that people brought in individuals to train us in doing combat, I kept getting hurt. Little here, little there. Didn't think too much of it because I figured I was young and invulnerable and all this other kind of stuff. So finally, it got to a point where I got my floating ribs bruised by a kick because an actor didn't point their foot. They curled their toes in, so they kicked me with their toes in the floating ribs. And I realized there's got to be a better way to do this. So I went and I sought out training, and I saw simply that the SAFD was the largest organization of its kind. So I was like, okay, let's go take a look at that. A friend of mine was taking an unarmed class, and I had done a lot of unarmed work previously, but he was testing and his partner had to bail on him. So we talked to the instructor, and the instructor had me do a couple of things and asked me a couple of questions about my skills and said, yeah, why don't you come in and take the test? Um, and so that was my first foray into formalized training. That instructor was Fightmaster Chuck Coyle, who became one of my mentors. And then I started taking classes through the Actors Gymnasium up in Evanston. Many classes, every opportunity I had, I took it. I took advantage of it. And when I realized that there was one point where I realized that this is something that I really want to invest my time in. I was working with a partner, and he was struggling with a particular technique. So I made a suggestion, and it worked really well. And he was very appreciative and grateful. And just that moment of realizing that I could actually help somebody in the situation where I wasn't as fortunate in my younger career, kind of made me change my whole path. So I wound up taking even more classes and doing renewal tests for my skills whenever I had an opportunity, and someone needed an extra partner, I would jump in. And then I became an assistant of Chuck's and a certified teacher named Angela Bonacasa, who is an amazing instructor in her own right. She now lives on the East Coast. But I wound up testing with the SAFD over 50 times throughout the course of 5 years because I wanted to continue to grow in any way I could. And once I got to that point, I realized that, okay, I want to teach this. So I applied to the teacher certification workshop that they have, and I was admitted, which was great. My way of teaching, though, is a little unconventional. So I wasn't actually approved fully as a certified teacher right out of the gate. They gave me what was called a provisional status. So I was allowed to teach a few different weapons, but I wasn't allowed to teach them all or create the actor combatant certification test, right? They had me go through some extra things. And my argument was about having to go through all of that was simply this. If they didn't like the way that I was teaching things, that's really not my problem, because if the students get the information and are able to use it and be safe and successful in everything they do, how, just because I don't teach it the same way that you do shouldn't make me any less of a teacher. And what was great about that was they didn't care. And they still made me go through a provisional status, which was totally fine. But about 20 years later, that same adjudicator of my teacher workshop came back to me and said, you actually changed my opinion about what it means to monitor future instructors, because it truly isn't about what I think should be taught. It's about how the teacher teaches the students and how the students respond to that information. And so it was a real wonderful turning point for me, because I see things a little differently, and as does every instructor. Um, when it comes to something like math, 2 + 2 is 4. However, in the arts, there's a different understanding for different people. Every individual thinks and feels differently. So I was really, I guess, blessed that I had that opportunity, to be able to go through an experience like that and come out on the other side, feeling validated about my individuality as a teacher. Um, so then once I did that, I felt I was comfortable enough in my skills to start choreographing, because I felt that if I can't teach an actor how to do a technique, I have no business choreographing anyone in that way as well. So then I started choreographing, and I was very lucky, I feel, in my opportunities, because there weren't a whole lot of people who did it at that time, and there were lots of theaters that needed it. So I was fortunate to be able to get in at a really great moment where I just had lots of shows that I was choreographing. I mean, at any given point, I was choreographing 6 or 7 shows at a time, which was absolutely wonderful. I couldn't have been more thrilled at the work. I was exhausted, but I was so excited about the opportunities that I really didn't care. Um, and then I started working in bigger companies and having greater opportunities throughout, and continued teaching and continued acting for a while. Um, but then I decided that I really wanted to devote my time to education. Um, and so that's when I ultimately went back and got my graduate degree in directing, and continued to move forward in that way, and was lucky enough to have an opportunity to be able to teach at Illinois State, which is my undergrad alma mater as well. So things just kind of fell into place for me in that way. Um, and it wasn't, that it, would it have been great if it happened 20 years earlier? Absolutely, 100%. But what I actually really like is that I found my path in my time, and was really fortunate to be able to ultimately land on something that I truly love to do. I mean, there's no doubt about it that I don't see myself doing anything else. Um, so I mean, I received my teacher certification in 2000, so I was 28 at the time, and then I received my fight director status in 2011. So tack on another 11 years, 28, 30. What is that? 39, 38, 39, somewhere around there. Um, and so, things have just continued to progress, and I get called out to do shows outside of the area as well. I just did a production of The Dutchman at Ball State University that they did live. However, with all the social distancing and stuff like that, the fight and intimacy work had to be completely revamped and rethought as to how we were going to do things, because no one could get within 6 feet of each other. So we created some really exciting ways to be able to do all of that. Um, and that part of it is really exciting as well. This is an incredibly challenging time, um, but I think of it as a really good thing, because it allows our brains to be able to try to think creatively in different ways. Um, so anyone who at this time kind of thinks that this isn't the time to do theater. We really can't do anything with it. We can't act. We can't be in a space. I will completely disagree. I think this is an incredible time to really kind of knuckle down and see what we can make out of what we have and expand our thoughts and views on theater in this way. But it ultimately all wound up revolving around staged combat. Um, I it has become who I am ultimately. I was always concerned about being called the fight guy. Yeah, we'll just call the fight guy up and he'll come in and he'll do his thing and it'll be great. And I am more than that, but that is what has got me to this point. So I ultimately wind up embracing that, because ultimately stage combat is really all about acting. You can't do stage combat well unless you have the ability to sell it as an actor. So it will forever be rooted in that for me, and that's why I've gotten to the point now where I just totally embrace what that is and who I am now. But
Cool.
that's a bit about me.
Awesome. So, we kind of want this to be kind of like a give and take. If anyone has any questions, we do have the raise hand feature in like the participants tab, so you can do that. I think there's the raise hand feature. If you just want to drop them in the chat, you can do that. But first and foremost, you mentioned the SAFD and things like active combatant, certified teacher, fight master, all that stuff. Would you mind kind of explaining what the SAFD is and what all of those certifications mean for people who may be unfamiliar?
Absolutely. Like any organization of this ilk, certifications are a way for people to understand that the individual who receives them has a certain set of skills in order to be able to accomplish whatever they ultimately have. The certifications are solely that. They're ultimately a piece of paper, right? Because of the fact that the SAFD is an organization, it cannot legally make a person certified, right? There's a difference between certified, like an EMT, right? They go through something different, and there is an organization that actually tests them and trains them and does all these things in a much greater and much more in-depth capacity than what, say, the SAFD does. So basically what it is it's a way to see that these people are at a certain level of their skill set, that they can be more trusted to do the work. Does that mean that a person without a certification isn't qualified to, say, do an unarmed fight? No, it doesn't mean that at all. I know many actors that don't have that certification, and they are incredibly qualified to be able to do stage combat. But what it does do is it allows producers to be able to actually use that as part of their arguments for reduced rates of insurance policies, because they are using people that have a specific set of training. What it also does is, with the SAFD, it gives you basically a home to be able to continue your training, find people that are of certain mindsets, and be able to ask questions and find resources and all of these other really amazing opportunities. What it also does is that, for example, if I am a choreographer on a show and I see a person has SAFD training, I know what I'm getting into with that person. So I may be more likely to try to push that person to be hired, because I know that I can work with that. So what there are individual certifications for each weapon or discipline that the organization works with right now. Currently, there are 8 different disciplines, and I'm going to try to rattle them off without forgetting one. There are as unarmed, knife, single sword, small sword, quarterstaff, rapier dagger, sword and shield. Is that all? No, there's one more. There's one more. Broadsword. Thank you. I knew I always forget one. But you can get these individual certifications in these different disciplines. Now, ultimately, you can then move to another level, which is called an actor combatant. An actor combatant has 3 different certifications under their belt minimum, and those have to be unarmed, single sword or rapier and dagger, plus a 3rd weapon. And so that means now that you're at this particular level where you can ultimately do all sorts of things that are required. Could somebody give you a broadsword if you don't have that certification and have you fight on stage? Yes, because you understand the importance of safety and targeting and all casting energy and all of these other things that are ultimately required of a person handling a sword. Then you can move up to a level that's called intermediate actor combatant, which I believe is now the case, which I believe is 5 different certifications, including those 3 from the basic actor combatant status. But I also believe that you have to have a certain amount of a particular type of passing level when it comes to those certifications. So in passing a certification test, there is passing at a basic level, which means that either your combat skills were strong or your performance skills were strong. So you were in a level that was safe enough to be able to not kill anybody or kill yourself. Then there is a recommended pass, which ultimately states that the SAFD recommends that you hire this person to be able to fight with this discipline, because they meet both of those criteria of being able to be safe and know the technical aspects, plus the performance quality that comes with that. So at an intermediate level, you need to have a couple of those recommended passes in order to hit that mark. Then there's an advanced level, which means you have to have more certifications and more recommended passes and disciplines, right? Ultimately, the goal is always to get all 8 certifications and all 8 as recommended passes. I didn't ever get to that point. Even with all of the testing I did, I think I ended up with, out of, let's say, like 55 certification tests that I did, I think I ended up with around 40 or 42 recommended passes, for a myriad of reasons why I didn't get it. Maybe I botched a technique, or my scene partner screwed up something, or something, it just happens. But it doesn't mean that you aren't any less qualified. It's just in that moment, just like as an actor audition, you just didn't fully bring it. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. But once you hit the advanced actor combatant status, then the next level is becoming a certified teacher, if that's the route you want to take. So then you go through, and what you need to do is you need to be able to have assisting training. So you go and you try to be a certified teacher's assistant, so you can watch how they work. Maybe they give you the opportunity to teach a few techniques so you can practice how you're doing it, and they give you feedback. You also, at that level, ultimately go and teach, like as an associate instructor at a regional workshop, and they give you a 90-minute class slot to be able to teach, and someone will monitor your work and provide feedback. So once you ultimately get to that and you pass that certification, and you become a certified teacher, the next level is fight director status. Now, fight director, you ultimately don't need to be a certified teacher to be a fight director. However, I personally feel that fight directors, part of their job is to teach safe technique. So if you don't have those skills, you're not going to be as proficient of a fight choreographer or fight director. So I always recommend that if you're going to do that with the SAFT, that you become a certified teacher and then apply to be a fight director. And that process is basically an application process where you submit all sorts of materials, including your CV and video work, videos of your work that you have done, so they can sit there and analyze it and see that you kind of understand the safety aspect plus the storytelling aspect and all of those other things. It is a little subjective, but so are auditions, right? So once you attain fight director status, the final level is fight master status. Now that's an honorary title for people who have had an incredibly long-standing career in stage combat. You have to be nominated and go through a vetting process in order to potentially receive that status. Currently, I believe there are somewhere around 20 or 21 fight masters within the organization. Those people are the adjudicate the skills proficiency tests for certifications. So, for example, Chuck Coyle is a fight master who we bring down, and he adjudicates our certification tests for our students at this time. Do I want to be a fight master? Sure. Is it going to break my heart if I'm not? No. Because it's not about that for me. But I understand the allure to be able to sit there and call yourself a fight master. It just sounds really cool and stuff, and that's great. But it doesn't really change anything for the person who's out there working day to day, right? If they're out there choreographing, if they're out there teaching, having the rank of fight master sounds great on paper. Some people will look at that and say, ooh, shiny, and that's really fabulous, and you can get more work from it. But also, the work that you get is because you are very skilled, because you're a good person to work with, you're professional and polite and respectful of all the people that you work with. So it's not something that ultimately anyone has to attain in order to be able to continue in a career like this. Some people think of the SAFD and other organizations of that ilk as some kind of a pyramid scheme, because you have to pay money to do the certification test. Then you have to ultimately go and be an assistant for someone, which means you don't get paid to be somebody's assistant typically, because it's more about learning how to do the work. And so there's an exchange that takes place, right? You can go and, like, when I became an assistant, I never paid for a renewal, really, whenever I jumped in on one, because my work in the class was ultimately the payment, was how I paid for it. So there's trade-offs like that happen. And I know that in this day and age, people are like, you should never go out there and work for free. However, I'm a little bit more old school in that way. And I'm not saying that I ever at any point would have an assistant who would like schlep my weapons or go get my coffee or stupid things like that. It's that there is that idea and understanding of, in order for you to be able to spend that time, either you pay for their time or you trade for their time. And I am completely acceptable of that and understanding of that. But the time is valued. And so that's why, in working with instructors like Chuck Coyle and Angela Bonacasa, I would be the tackling dummy. Basically, they would say, come over here, I'm going to throw you on the floor. And I'd be like, okay. And I go and I do it. And they knew that they could do that to me because I knew the techniques really well. So they had someone there that could demonstrate really well what the techniques were. And then my payment for getting thrown all over the place was being able to not have to pay for a renewal. Completely worth it, and things like that, right? I do think that's kind of important to be able to do that, because what it does is it actually proves to you that you really want it. And I find that to be important, because if you're going to spend your career doing something, then you better make damn sure that you want to do it. So when you have these like 3-4 years, which it ultimately was, of basically being someone's assistant, I relished in it. I loved the opportunity of being able to work and meet so many different people that I wouldn't trade it for anything personally. But I do know that there are people out there that feel that they should be paid for their time, and that's understandable. And some people do get that. And that's great. So it just kind of depends basically on your personal point of view in something like that, and whether or not you want to do it. So this idea of this ultimate pyramid scheme is that, they keep asking for your money, and, and in order for you to get this training and stuff like that. But when I became a certified teacher, I started teaching certification classes, and I was getting paid regularly to do that work. So the fees that I pay to be a certified teacher are significantly less than the fees I make teaching certification classes. The fees I pay as a fight director to the society are considerably less than the fees I make choreographing shows. The project I just worked, it will ultimately pay for me to renew my certified teacher and fight director status 5 times over. So that's one job. Great. I just made that money back. right? It's you have to look at it from that perspective in order to say, is it worth it? Some people say no, and like I said, there's plenty of qualified people out there that are not SAFD certified that work regularly. Matt Hawkins is a fight choreographer in Chicago that works very regularly at some of the biggest houses in the city, and he is not a certified teacher with the SAFD or a certified fight director. So one of the things that I find really beneficial about the organization is that sense of camaraderie, that sense of unity, that you can go and talk to these people and share resources and ideas. And there's value in that. And I know that I have received work because of the fact that I am an SAFD member. So I don't necessarily see it the same way that other people do. And so it's a long road. I think it's this idea that if you want it bad enough, you're going to keep going down that path. And so there's this attrition rate that kind of happens with it, that some people just fade off because they lose interest. But it's also the same thing with acting and directing and design and stage management and all of that. Sometimes you just lose interest and you decide to move on. The people who ultimately are able to continue down that path and do their thing, that's wonderful. The people who go off and do something else, that's great too. Finding your path is a long, arduous process, and when you actually find it and find that you really love it, stick with it, whatever it may be. I mean, if it's heating and air conditioning, who cares, right? But I find that a lot of people within the SAFD feel the same way that I do, in the fact that they don't see themselves doing anything else. So the organization I find to be a really valuable asset and a really valuable resource, because they have ultimately been at the forefront of training in stage combat since the late 70s. So totally worth it, in my opinion.
Awesome. Thanks. Does anyone else have any questions for John? You can either pop up on the screen, you can drop them in the chat.
I've got one.
Yeah.
That's all right. This is more from like an actor's perspective of a question, but like when you arrive on set to do a show and like you're not familiar with the actors, what is something an actor can do to stand out and like really prepare well and make a good impression on you?
That's a great question. Well, one of the things that I do is, a lot of times fight directors aren't involved in the casting process. So a lot of times we get what we get, which can be a good thing and a bad thing. But what I like to do is I like to ask to see their resume, so that at least I can tell what kind of skills they have, and if they have any kind of specific training, more importantly, dates listed as to when they received the training. Because unlike any skill, it's like any other skill, the further you are away from when you originally trained, the rustier you get. So it's one of those things where it's like, I'll check that out. But what I also like to do is I also like to just sit there and watch them move and be. So I like to go to first rehearsals. And my favorite time to pay attention, so to speak, is during the breaks, when I watch them get up and I walk around and interact with people. And it gives me at least some insight into how they can physically exist. So when it comes to fight work, one of the things that I like to do is I like to just stop and talk to them about the scene. And I ask them to tell me what your character's going through at this point. So really, a lot of it is knowing your character, because I can choreograph anything in any way, shape, and form. But an actor who really understands their character and why they're going to commit an act of violence tells me how I should choreograph it, right? And then other questions that I may ask are, well, does this person have any kind of training? 90% of the time it's no. They've maybe taken a cardio kickboxing class or something like that, but they really don't have a skill set in order to get into the situation that they're in. which is actually totally fine, because a lot of times you end up with actors who don't have training. So then you're ultimately starting from scratch, which is where the teaching comes in. So I can say, okay, the reason why we're going to swing this way is because you don't know how to. And the reason why we're going to swing in this location is for safety. So we merge the safety aspect and the story aspect into it, which makes the actor a lot more comfortable in understanding the why they're making the choice to do a certain move. So how can a person stand out in that way? Is really knowing their character and proving to the people in the room there's a reason why they're there. And the way that I look at that is simply this, that they do their homework, that they come into the space ready to work. I have worked with plenty of actors who have rather large egos, and they sit there and they'll say to me, I know I've done combat and I know how to fight. And I'm like, oh, okay, great. So then you know this? And they're like, what? I'm like, I always throw out a little test question or a test move or something like that, just to get at least a base understanding. And sometimes they succeed and sometimes they fail. It's just like anything else on your resume. If you put it on there, you damn well better be able to do it well. A lot of people put combat on their resume, but they haven't touched it in 20 years. So they can't do it well because they just don't remember. Rachel, you had a question?
Yes. Is there like a specific way we should notate training on a resume? Like, are there like specific titles we should use, or a format? Like, obviously include what kind of training, the dates, and if you have like a pass.
Yes, the SAFD, on the back of the certificates that everybody receives, there's a listing actually that says how you should list it on a resume.
That's so cool.
So it makes it a hell of a lot easier, right? Bree is showing it there. What that does is if you literally copy that and put that on your resume, we know that you are truly SAFD because you copied and pasted it on there, right? Because it lists, if I remember correctly, it lists the discipline, it lists basic or recommended pass, it lists the year. Is there anything else, Bree, that it lists?
It says verbatim, pass with recommendation in weapon style by the SAFD, and then comma the year.
So that right there tells us all we need to know. Does it help if we have the instructor's name, the certified teacher's name? It can help us understand that you learned that discipline in a particular style of that instructor. So like we all know that certain teachers teach in certain ways and specialize in certain skills. Like I am more of a grappler, ugly, messy kind of a choreographer. I know Loraldo Anzaldúa out of Indiana is martial arts, more martially based, right? It just, there are different things about those instructors that ultimately you find that are in their wheelhouse that are really their specialties. So sometimes that can help as well. But what I also find is that these types of courses and this type of training can also give people a certain level of confidence. And you can also tell that when you watch people exist in a space, that they are confident about who they are and their physicality and what they are capable of doing and not doing. So by watching people, it really gives me the opportunity to just say, okay, even if they don't list anything in terms of a skill set on their resume, I can tell they're really comfortable in their own skin. And that makes a huge difference as well. So it's not that everybody has to be able to throw a really strong punch. In fact, choreographically speaking, it's actually fun to be able to get people that don't know how to throw a really strong punch, because not a lot of characters know how to throw a really strong punch. And that's great. How many of them, unless it's classical, grabbing a weapon is something that is usually a found object kind of a scenario. the character happens to be in a kitchen and they grab the first thing that's either heavy or sharp. And that's what they use. I mean, it's like you're in a garage, you grab a tool, like a wrench or something like that. It's a lot of that found opportunity, unless, of course, it's something like Dangerous Liaisons or a Shakespeare or, something to that effect, which then it's a different skill set for the character, right? For example, in Three Musketeers, D'Artagnan starts off learning from his father. So he's okay as a fighter, but his father is significantly better. And then his father gives him the sword or whatever, blah, blah, blah. And then becomes better through that. So then D'Artagnan has to have a certain level of skill, but through the show progresses into being an incredible fighter, right? So someone who is an incredible fighter has the ability to kind of dumb down the skill set a little bit in order to be able to look as though they're not as proficient. So maybe they take wider steps, or they thrust their sword a little bit further out, or they're too far away, or this or that. But by having those skills, you're ultimately able to do more in a wide variety. But a lot of it is confidence in the individual, and the individual being able to easily say, I can do this, I can't do that. Because it's my job to ultimately get them to a place where they can do that. And if they can't, then we just find something else. That's the sign of a real choreographer, is the one that can look at the situation and adapt to whatever the abilities of the people are in the room. And if they can't, and it's all focused on, well, I want you to do this move because it's a really cool move, then they're not thinking about the show and about the characters and about the actors. They're thinking about how their choreography will look to an audience. And that's always a danger. Whenever you get a choreographer that does that, be wary, because they're not thinking about everything. They're thinking more about themselves, frankly. And I find that to be problematic. That happens with a lot of younger choreographers who want to prove themselves. So it's understandable. But as you get settled in, you realize that that's not it. If the people see a show and they're like, wow, this choreography was really, really awesome and exciting and this and that, I don't know if you necessarily did your job very well, because they're separating the choreography from the story. I would prefer, there was one quote that I received about in a review, what was his name? Chris, that said something along the lines of, the choreography was so incredibly simple, but it was one of the most frightening moments I have seen in theater. That tells me that we did a hell of a good job telling that story. Because choreography doesn't have to be complex. The story is what matters in all of it. We're there to accentuate the story and keep everybody from dying. And so I'm really happy when I can do simple choreography that is incredibly effective. So what I also find as a good thing for actors to be able to note is that they need to be able to check their ego at the door when it comes to their skill set. To be able to, because it's a testosterone fueled arena, stage violence and fighting and all of that other kind of stuff, which I think is kind of a joke as well. Because really it's about acting. And so if you have a strong actor, whether they're tall, short, thin, heavy set, male, female, non-binary, whatever the hell it is, they are an actor. And if they're a good actor, then they can become a good fighter on stage. I don't care about really anything else. You can have muscles on top of muscles. It don't matter to me, because that's not what the real characters are per se. Real characters, real people. So let's get real people doing this kind of work, because that's actually going to translate to the audience in a much better fashion. Do we have stories like the elaborate entrance of Chad Deity and the Girl in the Red Corner? Absolutely, we do. Those are specialized stories. Those are not the everyman type story, right? They're not the person, that everybody can identify with. that Midwest person who lives in their house and just kind of does their thing, and all of a sudden ends up in front of a really desperate situation and they have to fight their way out of it. That's the kind of stuff that I'm a huge fan of, is those kinds of stories. And that means the actors are truthful about their ability, humble about their skill set, because every individual is different. So every choreographer is different. So we all have to come in there and say, what can we create? Just being open to possibility. That's huge. I love it when people have skills, because then that means we can do more things, but it's not the be all end all. It never has been for me. Does that answer your question? That was a lot.
Yeah, that was great. Thank you.
Sure. I see that. How does theater combat differ from film combat? Film combat ultimately is a lot faster, because film can ultimately slow things down a little bit. Film also can flatten things out. So I could throw a punch in a targeted location, 2 feet away from somebody's face, and on film it'll read, and in theater it may not, right? Film can also focus people's attention to a particular location, whereas theater, there is a huge open space and there's all of these audience members there. If somebody sneezes, you turn and look and you may miss something that happened on stage, right? In film, the director's job is to tell the audience where to look. So it actually is there's a different kind of difficulty in it when it comes to creating film choreography versus theater choreography. Film choreography, it's interesting. Choreographers in film sometimes feel that choreographers in theater are like the, what's the word I'm looking for? I don't want to say it really bad way, but they're not as qualified. Let's put it that way. Which I completely disagree with. It's just a different medium. And in fact, I personally find theater choreography to be more difficult. Because if you take and shoot a film fight, and you get it in one take, you're done. But actors in theater have to do it night after night, week after week, potentially month after month or year after year. So there's that consistency while keeping it fresh is much more difficult, in my opinion, than somebody who throws a punch once on camera and it looks good. So there's a give and take, in my opinion. I completely and wholeheartedly respect people who choreograph for film, because it is difficult, just like anything else. The danger factor can be upped rather significantly. So I really appreciate the fact that they go the extra mile to make sure that safety is a huge priority. But there are also places that you can go and study film fighting, so that you can gain that additional understanding of what it's like. For example, there is the United Stuntmen's Association out of Washington that does a film fighting intensive and does a stunt, intensive, and a wire work intensive. And there's all sorts of things that they do there, and they do it really, really well. Personally, if you ever have the opportunity to do both, hell yeah, why wouldn't you, right? But don't ever be that actor on film who's like, I really think you need to punch me in order to sell this moment. Because my character needs to feel what it feels like. I think it was Tom Hiddleston who played Loki, and Chris Hemsworth who played Thor in the Avengers movie, where something like that took place. I don't ever find that to be necessary. I find that to be, frankly, stupid, moronic, idiotic, whatever you want to use. There's no need to do it. There's just no need to put yourself in that kind of danger in order to sell a moment. That's the director of photography's job. The DP's job is to make it look good. So why would you need to take that hit? There's no need to do that. It'd be the same thing as saying, I really need to know what it feels like to be stabbed. So could you just stab me, but just make sure you avoid my heart and my lungs and my kidneys and my liver and my pancreas and, just avoid all of that stuff and we'll be fine. There's no point to it. You wouldn't ever do that. So why do something where you could potentially have your jaw broken, have your teeth knocked out, have your nose broken, et cetera, et cetera. There's just no point. That's why we have stunt people in film. The stunt people are the ones that make us look like we got the crap beat out of us, or that we fell off this building or was in this car crash and stuff like that. That's a whole different set of skill. And those people, just like we keep saying about the Academy Awards, those people need to be recognized because their work is probably the hardest work in film and the least recognized. So, here, do fight choreographers have their own union? Are they part of SDC? This is actually a very recent thing that's taken place, is that through multiple, oh wait, Bree, you got your hand up?
Yeah, just real quick, this will probably be our last question. We are going to end around noon so that if you want to go to iStop, there's time. So just to let you guys know, this is probably going to be the last question.
Cool. After many months, potentially years of negotiation, fight directors are now recognized by the Stage Directors and Choreographers Union. Our base argument for it was you represent dance choreographers, and we are something else as well of that ilk. And there's still a lot of companies that don't recognize that yet, that aren't willing to hire SDC fight choreographers because they have to pay a lot more in order to be able to do that. So they have to pay health and pension and things like that for the person and for the union and all this kind of stuff. And some people just aren't willing to do it. So it's still a long process to get people to fully recognize that fight choreographers deserve that opportunity to be represented by a union. I greatly appreciate all of the people who were involved in ultimately making that happen, because it does help us be able to do our work more efficiently, be able to be paid properly for the work that we do. I can't tell you how many times I've gone in to do a show where, it involves, all of these different mass battle fights, and I get paid, $500 for essentially 6 weeks worth of work. It's not okay. But when you're younger, you need to get the work to build up the resume to be able to go get the bigger jobs. So it's something that you wind up dealing with. But that's also the thing that ultimately stops people from working, is because they can't afford to live like that. So they wind up taking other jobs and things. But the SDC is really the place that gave us a unionized home. And there are plenty of companies out there that do recognize that. You do not have to be an SAFD member to be an SDC member. There are many fight choreographers out there, fight directors that are a part of SDC that are not a part of the SAFD. So really, ultimately, you have to prove yourself by the work that you do, by the shows that you work on, by word of mouth, by all of those things, just like any other industry in that respect, especially when it comes to theater. I find it that it is something that really I'm very happy that we finally have. Now it's just getting to the next step of being able to have everybody nationally recognize that. But yeah, the SDC is definitely the people.
Well, thank you so much, John, for coming and doing this. Thank you, everyone, so much for coming. This is being recorded, so if you want to watch it, if you missed something, it will be up on our YouTube channel. And then, yeah, thank you guys so much for coming. John, do you have anything else that you want to touch on before we close out?
If this is something that you're interested in, you want to learn more about the SAFD and stuff like that, you can go to safd.org. So it's not the San Antonio Fire Department. So check that out. If you have other questions or inside information that you'd like to know about the organization as well, you can always ask me. So I'm more than happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thanks so much for coming in, John.
Thank you. This was great fun. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you all about it.
Yeah. And thanks
Thank you.
everyone for coming out.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank
And we will
you.
be having another town hall guest panel next week, so keep your eye out on our Facebook page, on the listserv for more information about that. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. Take care.